not here. So, that's all right. So, hope everyone had a good week. And if you have your Bible, turn to 2 Kings chapter number 19. 2 Kings chapter number 19. And we're going to start in verse number 1. It says, "And it came to pass, when King Hezekiah heard it, that he rent his clothes, and covered himself with sackcloth, and went into the house of the Lord. And he sent Eliakim, which was over the household, and Shebna the scribe, and the elders of the priests, covered with sackcloth, to Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos. And they said unto him, Thus saith Hezekiah, This day is a day of trouble, and of rebuke, and blasphemy, for the children are come to the birth, and there is not strength to bring forth. It may be the Lord thy God will hear all the words of Rabshakeh, whom the king of Assyria his master has sent to reproach the living God, and will reprove the words which the Lord thy God hath heard. Wherefore lift up thy prayer for the remnant that are left. So the servants of the king Hezekiah came to Isaiah. And Isaiah said unto them, Thus shall ye say to your master, Thus saith the Lord, Be not afraid of the words which thou hast heard, with which the servants of the king of Assyria have blasphemed me. Behold, I will send a blast upon him, and he shall hear a rumor, and shall return to his own land, and I will cause him to fall by the sword in his own land. So Rabshakeh returned and found the king of Assyria warring against Libnah, for he had heard that he was departed from Lachish. And when he heard say of Tirhakah, king of Ethiopia, Behold, he is come out to fight against me, he sent messengers again unto Hezekiah, saying, Thus shall you speak to Hezekiah, king of Judah, saying, Let not thy God, in whom thou trustest, deceive thee, saying, Jerusalem shall not be delivered into the hand of the king of Assyria. Behold, thou hast heard what the kings of Assyria have done to all the lands by destroying them utterly, and shalt thou be delivered? Have the gods of the nations delivered them which my fathers have destroyed, as Gozan and Haran and Rezeph, and the children of Eden which were in Thelasar? Where is the king of Hamath, and the king of Arpad, and the king of the city of Sepharvaim, and Hena and Iva? And Hezekiah received the letter of the hand of the messengers, and read it. And Hezekiah went up into the house of the Lord, and spread it before the Lord. And Hezekiah prayed before the Lord, and said, O Lord God of Israel, which dwellest between the cherubims, thou art the God, even thou alone, and of all the kingdoms of the earth, thou hast made heaven and earth. Lord, bow down thine ear and hear. Open, Lord, thine eyes and see, and hear the words of Sennacherib, which he has sent to reproach the living God. Of a truth, Lord, the kings of Assyria have destroyed the nations and their lands, and have cast their gods into the fire, for they were no gods, but the work of men's hands, wood and stone, therefore have they destroyed them. Now therefore, O Lord God, I beseech thee, save thou us out of his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that thou art the Lord God, even thou only. And so I'll stop reading right there. So as y'all know, we've been working our way through Hezekiah right here and studying him, and we know that in the 14th year of his reign, that's when Sennacherib decided to come up and besiege Judah, and he came up and he took the fenced cities of Judah. And when he took the fenced cities of Judah, Hezekiah sends a message to him and says, Hey, just tell me whatever you'll put on me, that's what I'll bear. And so he tells him what he's going to, he tells him how much silver he wants, how much gold he wants, and Hezekiah does what he asks. And almost as soon as he does what he asks, here comes Rabshakeh with this great and mighty army, and you're going to see later, I think it's 185,000. I think it's like 104 scored 5,000 or something. You got to think, here he comes with this mighty army. He's got 185,000, at least 185,000 soldiers. And here is Hezekiah in Jerusalem, and he's already taken some of his fenced cities, and he doesn't have that big an army. If you remember that Rabshakeh, when he challenged him, he said, I'll give you 2,000 horses if you've got 2,000 men to put on them. I don't even think you got 2,000 grown-up men that could fight to put on these horses right here. And so then Rabshakeh goes into a tirade, and the tirade was not just for Hezekiah. It was purposefully said that, to the people on the wall. It was purposely said for the men on the wall. He wanted to intimidate them. If you read the comparable story over in Chronicles, that's what it says. That's the whole reason why he said what he said, and how he said it, and why he said it to the people he said it, was he wanted to intimidate them. You're going to see again here that for whatever reason, and again we understand that God was using Assyria to punish Judah. But he was only going to let them go so far. And so, I mean, if you think about it, Chris. If you've got an army of 185,000, and you've got this one city, I mean, wouldn't you just say, you know what? I tell you what, we're going to lose some people. Well, what's the point of just sitting here talking about it? We're just going to go in there and we're just going to take it. I mean, that's what I would think if I got an army of 185,000. And you've got, and again, I don't know that his number was accurate, but let's just say, you've got 2,000 men against 185,000. I got a pretty good idea who should win that battle. Unless God intervenes, I got a pretty good idea. But God only let them come up so far, and let them do all their talking and all their blustering and all that stuff, but they didn't come into the city. And so he speaks, and we ended the chapter last week where that Hezekiah told the men, like, look, don't answer him a word. Just don't even say a word to him. Don't huff and, he's going to huff and puff and threaten to blow your house down, but don't y'all say a word back to him. Don't say, yeah, I believe it, or no, I don't believe it. Don't say anything. And so we get to chapter number 19, and they come to Hezekiah, and they tell Hezekiah what it is. And the first thing Hezekiah does is he rent his clothes and covered himself with sackcloth. And so again, sometimes, and we see it today more than ever, where leaders are insulated from what the common people are experiencing. The leaders are just insulated. You're like, hey, I got this problem here, and it's not their problem. That's why whenever they make all these laws, and they exempt themselves out of the laws that they force on the common people. But here you have Hezekiah, and he hears the words that the men had heard, and he was moved by it. He was affected by it. And you got to think, I mean, for 14 years he's prospered. For 14 years that, God has blessed him. And we can debate if we want to, but I think he made a mistake whenever he made the first deal with Sennacherib. I think he made a mistake when he made the first deal. Whenever he said, whatever you put on me, I'll bear. That was a mistake. That should have been the time that he went to God at first and said, hey, look, why did these cities get taken? Why did this happen? Why, what's going on? And God could have showed him then that he was the king of a hypocritical nation. That God's going to have to punish them because they're serving God, but they're not serving God with their whole heart. They're serving God on the outside, but on the inside, they've still got things that they want to do that are contrary to what God wants. And so in verse number 1 of 19, God had to get Hezekiah's attention. And he used the king of Assyria, and he used Rabshakeh and his words to get Hezekiah's attention. And so he rents his clothes and he puts on sackcloth. And look at the next thing he does at the end of verse 1. And he went into the house of the Lord. And so again, like I said, I mean, before, I mean, he took counsel. They took counsel with, they took counsel. Hey, what are we going to do? What are we going to do about this? But now Hezekiah is doing what he needs to do. He's taking this serious. He's taking this serious, and he's taking his petition to God and showing God that he's serious. When you're the king, instead of walking around in your royal robes, you're walking around in sackcloth. You're walking around in sackcloth, and you walk into the temple. You walk into the temple, and they see you. Guess what? Everyone knows that he's taking it serious, and everyone understands that, hey, this is a big deal. And here's Hezekiah. He didn't call up the Ethiopians. He didn't call up the Egyptians. He didn't call up. I mean, that's what Rabshakeh accused him of doing. Hey, I know what you're going to do. You're going to call up the Egyptian and try and get the Egyptians, but you lean on him, and that's going to hurt you. It's not going to help you. That's not what he did. And he also accused him of going to his God. Well, guess what? That was what he was going to do. He was going to go to his God. He was going to pray. And so here's a situation that was certainly too big for Hezekiah. It was too much for him. It was a situation that, like I said, militarily, there was no way he could win. That militarily, there was no way. I mean, yeah, he made some shields and he made some stuff, but if you don't have the soldiers, you don't have soldiers. And you got a 185,000 man army that's sitting out there chomping at the bit to take you over, and you don't have that many people. Guess what? You're probably going to lose, just militarily. Unless you can petition someone to come help you. Unless you can petition someone to come help you. Unless you have, superior firepower. If you got a 185,000 person army and the people you're fighting against don't have that many people, but they got superior aerial support and they got nuclear weapons, guess what? That's a little bit more of a fair fight. It's a little bit more of a fair fight. But he didn't have that. He didn't have that. And so he couldn't depend on another nation. If you remember that Sennacherib took all his money. He took his money, so he couldn't go to another nation and said, hey, come up here and fight against him. He didn't have that option. And sometimes, and I mentioned it last week, sometimes God has to take our other options away from us. Sometimes God, he knows who we are, and we'll exhaust all other options. It's like, okay, I can do this, or depend on God. And you know what God did? God said, I'll take that one away, and I'll take that one away, and I'll take that one away. I took his fenced cities away. I took his money away. And he's only got one choice, and that's to depend on me. But again, God was not just working on Hezekiah. He was working on the people. He was working on the people because they were a hypocritical nation, because their heart had turned away from God in those 14 years from the time that they had whenever he first took over and they rebuilt the temple and they celebrated that first Passover until now they had turned back that they were a hypocritical nation. And so not only is he working on Hezekiah, but he's working on the people. And he let those people hear that and let those people understand as they sat on the wall and they looked out over that wall and they said, we're in trouble. We're in trouble. We're in trouble. So we look out over this wall and we see that, hey, this is going to be bad. There's not enough men inside Jerusalem that's going to be able to fight the amount of men that are outside of Jerusalem. And so then they see their king who they would have looked to and said, what are we going to do now? Who are you going to bring in? There's no one to bring in. No. I mean, you're going to call on somebody? No, there's no one to call on. We'll take up an offering. There's not enough money. There's not enough money. We've already taken it all up. I mean, you see the house of the Lord. We've already pulled the gold off the doors. There's not enough money. We're not going to be able to do that. Well, what are we going to do? We're going to call on God. That's what we're going to do. We're going to call on God. We're going to trust God to deliver us. And so the very first thing he does is he goes into the house of the Lord. He goes in the house of the Lord, and no doubt that was quite a prayer meeting. But he goes in there, and in verse number 2, now he says he sends Eliakim and Shebna and the elders of the priest. He's going to send them to Isaiah. And if you read Isaiah in chapter 36 and chapter 37, it's basically almost word for word identical to what you read of this passage in chapter number 18 and chapter number 19. It's almost word for word. And so he sends them to Isaiah to go speak to Isaiah the prophet and say, hey, look, we need a word from God. We need a word from God. And I don't know how many times you've been in this situation in your life, but how many times have you just got to the place where the only thing you need is a word from God? Someone else can tell you it's going to be fine. Someone else is going to tell you Romans 8:28's in the book. They're going to tell you all that stuff. But until God gives you that word, you're not comforted. You're not satisfied. And so you get down and you pray and you read your Bible and you're searching. And the moment that God gives you that word, it's all good now. It's all good. Nothing had changed. Nothing changes, For them, they're looking outside. The army's still there. The army's still there. But as soon as God can give the word that it's going to be okay, guess what? It's going to be okay. And so again, Hezekiah went and he goes and he prays, but he's like, you know what? I haven't got my answer yet. Let's go to Isaiah. Let's go to Isaiah. I want you to go to Isaiah. So he sends him to Isaiah, but it says they were covered with sackcloth. And so they go in sackcloth. They go in sackcloth to show Isaiah, hey, look, this is serious. And you know what? Isaiah already knew. He already knew it was serious. He knew it was serious. But sometimes, like I said, sometimes you have to let the people come to you when they're serious. You can tell someone, I think Dakota's not here, but that's one of Dakota's. Everyone has these little words. Everyone has words or phrases that they say. And Dakota's it's a serious thing. Brother Sammy used to say it too. But Dakota says, it's a serious thing, friend. It's a serious thing. And everyone has those words, but it's a serious thing. And so, but until you decide it's a serious thing, until it's important to you, someone can get up here and preach all they want to. Someone can get up here and teach all they want to. Someone can come to you and talk to you all you want to. Hey, this is serious. This is serious. You need to take this serious. But until you decide to take it serious. And so now, here's Isaiah, and he knew what was going to happen the whole time. He knew the Assyrian army was going to come up and take on Jerusalem. He knew they were coming up there, and he knew why they were coming up there. And he just needed to see that hypocritical nation, that the work that God intended with the Assyrian army, that work was being done. And when those men come up in sackcloth, they'd humbled themselves and said, hey, look, we're in trouble. We're in trouble. And so if you see in verse number 3, it says, they said unto him, thus saith Hezekiah, this day is a day of trouble. He said, look, it's a day of trouble. This is a problem. This is a day of trouble because this is bad all the way around. Here it is. We've had 14 years of prosperity. We've lived pretty good. But now this is a day of trouble because we've got this army out here. This army's out here, and this army is bigger than what we can fight. This army is bigger than what we can fight. He said, this is a day of trouble and of rebuke. And again, when you read that word rebuke, I don't think he was saying this was a day of rebuke that Sennacherib was rebuking Hezekiah. No, I think he understood that this was a rebuke from God. This was a rebuke from God. Hey, you've gotten out of line. You've taken me for granted. You've taken my blessings for granted. The service that you were so serious about when you first started your kingdom, it's not being taken serious anymore. Whenever y'all celebrate the Passover now, it's not the occasion that it was when you first. And think about people when they get saved. Think about people when they first get saved, Gil. They're so excited. They're just so excited. And they'll do anything, and they'll change anything. And it's like, hey, we're going to have a work day at church, and the first one to raise their hands is the new converts. We'll be there. But then after a while, you get used to it, you get comfortable, and you start, and I'm going to use the word sliding back. You start sliding back into some old habits, and you don't go all the way back, but, they're like, hey, we're going to have a revival. Oh, another revival. That's all we do is go to church. That's all we ever do is go to church. Hey, we're going to have 2 preachers tonight. 2 preachers? 2 preachers. I remember whenever I first got saved, I used to travel all over, Brother Croft. I'd hop in my truck and travel all over. I traveled 2.5 hours one way to hear Brother Clayton preach a tent meeting. And 2.5 hours home and got up the next morning and went to work. And so, I used to travel all over. But now it's like we're going to have 2 preachers at church tonight. I don't know about all that. I hope they cut the singing down. I hope we just sing one song. I got to get up and go to work next morning. And you live 5 miles from church. But you understand, what happens? It just happens. You take your salvation for granted. And you just think, God's always going to be there and he's always going to do stuff for you and everything's good while I go to church. And you get colder and colder and colder and colder, and before long you're so cold that you're like a popsicle. And you didn't even realize, because it was gradual, and God has to shake you up. God has to shake you up. He has to shake you up and have something happen for you to be like, oh, gracious, look where I'm at. Look where I've let myself get to. Look at what I've been taking for granted. I've been taking God for granted. I just show up at church and do my little thing, put my little tithes in the offering, put my little missions, put my little whatever in the offering, and then I'm good. God, right there. Put my little star, like you're in the primary class back there. Put your little star. Got my little perfect attendance going. Boom, boom, boom. Got stars for every Sunday, every Sunday night, every Wednesday night. Boom. Got revival. Put my little stars up for revival, and you're still cold as can be. And so here he said, hey, it's a day of trouble, but it's also a day of rebuke. It's a day of rebuke. And even though the man that said these words is a heathen, guess what? It was God that allowed those words to be said to shake me up and make me realize where I'm at. It was God that allowed those words to be said to make me understand that, hey, we're a hypocritical nation. We're not a nation we walk around. We used to be so proud, we're a Christian nation. You can't say that anymore. You can't say that anymore. We might have been founded by men. We might have been founded by men who were trying to follow God, but there are not many. There are not many up there in Washington, D.C. that are trying to follow God right now. They're trying to follow their pocketbook. They're trying to build their retirement. They're trying to build up their nest eggs and trying to get in with the crowd. They're trying to get the media to praise them, but not many are trying to get God to say, "Well done." And so here Hezekiah said it's a day of trouble and of rebuke and of blasphemy. He said, I'd never thought I'd have heard some of the words that come out of Rabshakeh's mouth. I can't even believe that someone would say what they said about God. To have the nerve to say about our God. This is not acceptable in my eyes that they were able to say this about our God. He said, it's a day of blasphemy. For the children are come to the birth, and there's not strength to bring forth. Again, I think when you look at this, you look at it militarily. I think he looked at it and said, look, we're not strong enough. We are not strong enough. We do not have the power. If it's army against army, and it's just the men of Judah, if it's just the men of Jerusalem fighting the men of Assyria, we are going to lose. We are going to lose. The children are coming to the birth, and there's not strength. We do not have the strength. We are going to lose this battle. Unless God intervenes, we will lose this battle. Period. And so he says, it may be that the Lord will hear all the words of Rabshakeh, whom the king of Assyria master has sent. He said, look, I really hope God was listening. I hope God was listening. I hope when Rabshakeh was talking about, when you look in verse number 33, hath any of the gods of the nations delivered all his land out of the hand of the king of Assyria? Where are the gods of Hamath and of Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim, Hena, and Ivah? Have they delivered Samaria out of mine hand? Who are they among all the gods of the countries that have delivered their country out of mine hand, that the Lord should deliver Jerusalem out of mine hand? And so again, Rabshakeh threw it right in God's face, not just Hezekiah's face, because Hezekiah wasn't there. Not just the men that Hezekiah had sent out, not just the men on the wall, but he threw it right in God's face, that I am not scared of your God. I'm not scared of your God, because these other nations that we've attacked, these other nations that we've taken over, they had gods too, and we destroyed them. If you remember, he actually threw it in their face. Hey, look, God, your God's going to be unhappy with you because Hezekiah took away the places for you to go worship your God. And so he said, hey, look, he said, I just hope that God heard the words and said, no. I'm not going to let this heathen from Assyria come down and talk about me like that. And so he says, to reproach the living God. And that's what Rabshakeh did. Again, like I said, when we read the passage over there in Isaiah, when I read the passage in Isaiah, I showed y'all that, hey, that God said that was going to happen. I'm going to use the Assyrians to do the work that I need done on that hypocritical nation, but they're going to go too far. They're going to go too far. He's going to take it too far. He's going to push it too far. And when he pushes it too far, then I'm going to have to deal with him. And so here, Hezekiah is like, look, surely God heard these words and heard the blustering and the boasting and the fact that he compared Jehovah, God, to the gods of Hamath and Arpad and Sepharvaim and Hena and Ivah. And how can God hear him being compared with those little g gods, those gods that they sat there and they carved out with their own hands, and they would bow down and worship these gods that had no power. They didn't breathe. They couldn't speak. They couldn't talk. They couldn't hear. They couldn't do anything, but they bowed down to those gods and trusted in those little g gods to save them. And now Rabshakeh is like, your God is just like that God. Your God is just as small as those other gods that I've taken, and I've destroyed their God, and I threw it in the fire and burned those gods in the fire because they weren't gods at all. But Rabshakeh said, because my master, Sennacherib, and the kings of Assyria and the Assyrian army are greater than any god that we can come up against. We're greater than any god. There is no God that's powerful enough to stop us. And so he tells Isaiah, he said, wherefore lift up thy prayer for the remnant that are left. And you think about this, and I don't know. I mean, I was reading one commentary, and the one commentary wanted to go back to chapter number 18, where Israel was taken captive. In verse number 11, and the king of Assyria did carry away Israel unto Assyria and put them and he took Israel captive. But you got to think also that in verse number 13, and now in the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the fenced cities of Judah and took them. So again, I don't necessarily know, because Israel and Judah had been separated for so long and they'd actually fought against each other for so long, I don't know that he was looking at Israel as part of them, but I do know that when he took those fenced cities, that he, those that weren't killed were taken captive. And so he's telling God, he said, look, he said, for the remnant that are left, again, like I said, when you look at it militarily, when you look at it like, hey, there's just not enough of us. There's not enough of us. And sometimes, again, God has to get you to the place where then you search your heart. God, what is it? What is it you're trying to do? What is it I've done wrong? What is it I've allowed in? What is it that's causing this? Why is this happening? And then once you determine what that happened, what's been causing it, and you get that right, and the battle's still there, then you have God back on your side. And God said, all right, I can take care of it now. and so in verse number 6, and Isaiah said unto them, thus shall you say to your master, thus saith the Lord. So again, Isaiah is speaking, but he's speaking for God. Be not afraid of the words which thou hast heard. I mean, sometimes that's all you need to hear. Sometimes that's all you need to hear. You just need to hear God say, look, don't be afraid. Be not afraid. Be not afraid. I woke up this morning and I had that song in my mind, and I don't even attempt to sing. So I'm not going to sing, but that song that says, be not afraid, for it is I, something about in the fourth watch of the night, whenever Jesus comes to the disciples, that's all you need to hear, Brother Bobby. You're like, hey, this is going on in my life, and it's so big, it's just overwhelmed me. And then God says, I got this. I got this. I got this. I remember one time, this was last week was our 24-year anniversary. And I remember whenever me and Aaron were dating, and we were trying to, just trying to find out if it was God's will. And whenever we first started talking, Chris, we just started talking. We just started talking, and next thing you know, I realized that she loved me, and so I felt like it'd be appropriate for me to, go ahead and love her back. But so here we are, and at first, my father-in-law, he was not happy. He was not happy because, that was his baby girl, and she was 16, and I was 20, and so their relationship was going to change. He'd already had 3 girls married. He understood, and he had I'll leave that part out. But anyway, so, he had some bad experiences, and so it made it that much worse. And so here I am, and it was a struggle, Chris. It was a struggle because all I ever wanted to do was make sure I found God's will. That's what I wanted to do. When it come to dating, I got a phone call one time from a girl who used to go to this church, and she's like, "Well, why don't you talk this? Well, I don't know whether it's I don't know if it's God's will. You can talk to her." And I'm like, well, I don't really want to start a conversation with someone and try and develop that relationship if it's not God's will. And it was ridiculous. It was ridiculous to that girl. But that's what I wanted, Brother Bobby, and it was a struggle, and I was praying and praying and praying. And I know that some people will be like, that didn't happen. But I was at work. I was at work when God told me it was His will. I was at work. I was right down the road where Fairmount Poultry is now. It wasn't Fairmount Poultry at the time. It was Kidron. And I was over there and I was working. And I could, and if they let me in the building and it was laid out almost the same, I could about take you to where it was. And I was over there working, and I was just praying about it at work. And God said, "It's good." And that was it. It was done. I was done. I didn't worry about it anymore. And everything was still the same. My father-in-law was still upset about it, and then my mother-in-law got upset about it, and all the sisters were upset about it, and they're like, no, but God said, hey, it's good, and I'm like, they can say what they want to, it's too late. They can say what they want to, it's too late now. God said it's good. God said, I've got this. And so I just gave it to God and let Him have it. And so you understand that when God says, be not afraid, you're disobeying God after that if you're afraid. You're disobeying God. Once He says, I've got this, just take your hands off the wheel. Just take your hands off the wheel. be like, hey, God, I'll go handle this now. No, let me handle it. Let me handle it. And so he says, thus shall you say to Master, thus saith the Lord, be not afraid of the words which thou hast heard, which the servants of the king of Assyria have blasphemed me. So again, here's the Lord speaking, and he said, I heard him. I heard what he said. I heard him going on and on about this God and that God, who were no gods at all. I heard everything he said. I heard him talk about how big the king of Assyria was. I heard him talk about how bad the king of Assyria was. I heard him talk about what he was going to do to you. I heard him say all of that stuff. I heard him say every bit of it. I heard him blaspheme me directly. And so he says in verse number 7, he said, I'll send a blast. He said, I'll send a blast upon him, and he shall hear a rumor. I mean, you think, here is God that is telling Hezekiah, hey, look, I'm going to make it where you don't even have to fight. I mean, there were a lot of times where God told him, hey, look, he kept whittling the army down till it was just a few. But he let him go fight. But he's like, this time, this is going to be like the walls of Jericho. This is going to be like the walls of Jericho, boys. You're just going to stand back and watch. You're going to stand back and watch, and you're going to be amazed, and you're going to have to say, only God did that. Sometimes God has to get you to the place in your life where you look and say, only God did it. Only God could have done it that way. Only God could have rescued me that way. Only God who took a hand in it and said, I'm going to deal with it, and I'm going to deal with it my way, so that you can sit back and not later say, well, I had it all the time. Because, that's who we are. You think about it. There are times where God does something for you, and then you're like, well, maybe. No, God put this one where Hezekiah and the men of Judah, the only thing they could do is say, God did this. God handled this. God rescued us. And so he said, I'll send a blast, and he shall hear a rumor and shall return to his own land. And I will cause him to fall by the sword in his own land. God said, I'm going to take care of this. I'm going to take care of this, and I'm going to send him back. I'm going to send him back to his own land, and then I'm going to let him die in his own land. Verse number 8. So Rabshakeh returned and found the king of Assyria warring against Libnah. So again, you got to think, here it is. Here's Rabshakeh and this huge army outside the wall, and here's Hezekiah. He goes to the temple to pray, and then he sends the messengers out. He sends the messengers out to speak to Isaiah, and now Rabshakeh is like, I don't have instructions to do anything else. I don't have instructions. Again, like I said, militarily would have been like, well, let's just go in and take this stupid city. Let's just go in and take this thing. But not only did he not have instructions from Sennacherib, he didn't have instructions from God, because God was turning him. He didn't even realize it. But God was turning him the way he wanted him turned. And so here he's like, well, I don't even know what to do. Sitting out here, got all these men, prepared to fight. And doesn't appear that they're going to come out and surrender. And I haven't had any word to say go in and take them over. So I need to go find the king and find out, hey, what in the world do you want me to do? So he goes and he looks, and Sennacherib had departed Lachish, and now he finds him in Libnah, and he's like, hey, he said, what in the world? What are we supposed to do? and so you see in verse number 9 that the king of Ethiopia, God said, I'll just stir up the king of Ethiopia. I'll be like, hey, you go. You go and just annoy him. Just get him distracted. Just go up there and get him distracted. And I've got some stuff that I'm doing, but I'm going to use you to go up there and get him distracted. And so he says, look, all right, we can't deal with them right now, but here's what I want you to do. At the end of the verse, behold, he has come out to fight against thee. He sent messengers again unto Hezekiah. So now he said, look, I just need you to go up and send them. For what? Again, we know it was God. We know it was God that was doing it. But like I said, militarily, instead of just saying, look, we'll just go up there and take that city and then get that taken care of, and then that way we'll have that taken care of, we'll have that out of the way, because I don't want to be fighting those guys and then fighting this guy from Ethiopia. I don't want to be fighting in two different fronts. I just want to have one, so let's just get this taken care of. That's what you'd think he would have done. But instead he was like, no, I just want them to surrender. I just want them to just wave the white flag and come out and say, okay, we'll serve you. And so he says in verse number 10, thus shall you speak to Hezekiah. So he's like, I need you to go back up there and say to Hezekiah one more time. I want you to go up and huff and puff and threaten to blow his house one more time. And this time he better get it, because I'm serious this time. I'm really serious this time. And so he says, let not thy God, again, here he goes again. Here he goes again. He's speaking to Hezekiah. If you remember, he told the people, he said, hey, don't you let Hezekiah convince you to trust in God. But now he's trying to speak directly to Hezekiah, and he's like, hey, don't you let your God deceive you. He said, let not thy God, in whom thou trustest, deceive thee, saying, Jerusalem shall be delivered into the hand of the king of Assyria, or shall not be delivered into the hand. He said, look, I know what you're doing. I know what you're doing. You're down there in your little temple, and you're down there in your little temple, and you're on your knees, and you got your little sackcloth on. Well, guess what, buddy? It's not going to work. I don't care what you think. I don't care what you hear. I don't care what you feel like God says to you. Guess what? It's not going to work, because I don't think your God's real. I don't believe your God's real. Your God's just like every other God that the people trusted in, that they were praying to whenever I took over their cities. And he said in verse number 11, behold, thou hast heard what the king of Assyria have done to all the lands by destroying them utterly, and shalt thou be delivered? He said, listen. He said, don't you understand what I've done everywhere else? Any other place that I've said, I'm going to go conquer that place, guess what I did? I went and conquered that place. All those other places that had their little G gods, guess what? They could pray and pray and pray to their little G gods. When I got done with them, they were destroyed, and I went ahead and just destroyed their little G god while I was at it. I went and made a big showing about how that their little G God was not as powerful as the king of Assyria. And you think you're going to be delivered? You think your God's going to be different than their God? The answer was yes. The answer was, oh yeah, I do. I do think my God's different than your God. I do think the God that I pray to is different than the God that these other nations have prayed to. I do think my God's more powerful. And I've got this story and that story and this story and that story to back it up. From the time they walked out of Egypt, till the time they come in the land, to David fighting the giant, I've got story after story after story after story of God, of my God delivering his people. So yeah, as a matter of fact, I do. In verse number 12, have the gods of the nations delivered them which my fathers have destroyed? Again, so he just goes through a list. He said, hey, look, he said Gozan and Haran and Rezeph and Eden and Thilasar. He said, look, all these people trusted in their God. They trusted in their God, and me and my fathers have destroyed them. Verse number 13, where is the king of Hamath, and the king of Arpad, and the king of the city of Sepharvaim, and of Hena, and Iva? He said, where are they? Again, like I said, I mean, if you were just looking at it, I mean, it'd sound pretty bad. It'd be like, of a truth, we got nothing for him. We got nothing for him. But again, he was blaspheming God. And Hezekiah was not like, hey, I'm gonna build a mighty army and I'm gonna fight this guy. No, he said, God, I just hope you heard. I hope you heard what he said. I hope you heard what he said about you. And then he goes to Isaiah. He sends his messenger to Isaiah, and Isaiah's like, hey, God said, I heard what he said about me. And what does the king do? The king of Assyria says, you know what? Go tell him, I'm going to blaspheme God some more. I'm going to blaspheme God some more. Again, it was just showing Hezekiah that, hey, look, God already said he heard, and now the king of Assyria is doubling down on it. I'm going to double down on it. I'm going to blaspheme God that much more. I'm going to challenge him that much more. I'm going to try to show him that his God is like all the other gods that much more. I think I'm going to stop right here. I'm going to stop right here. We'll pick up in verse number 14 next week as Hezekiah receives that letter from the messengers. He receives the letter from the messengers, and Chris, what does he do again? He goes right back. He goes right back to the house of the Lord. He goes right back down there. He opens that letter out. He rolls it out there and says, God, I just want you to see. I just want you to see. I know you've already said you're going to take care of it. I know you already said be not afraid. So guess what, God? I'm not afraid. I'm just bringing it down here. I'm just going to get down on my knees, and I'm going to spread this thing out before you. And I'm going to say, look, hey, you already said you're taking care of it, so I'm not going to deal with it. You've already said you're going to take care of it, so I'm not going to deal with it. I'm just not. Here it is, God. Thank you.